Jaya Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Gaurachandra Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Jaya Gadadhar Jaya Srinivas Jaya Mukunda Vasudevi Jaya Haridas.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to the GBC SPT page. My name is David Madhavadas, and I'm very happy to have with us today His Grace Kripamoya Prabhu. Welcome, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much
Jai
for
Gauranga.
Jai Mahaprabhu.
Jai Jai.
Kripamoya Prabhu is a disciple of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, and he joined very early on, which I'm excited to ask Prabhu about in a moment. And here he was resolute in his determination from a very young age, and he's been a steady servant of the movement. He's an initiating spiritual master. My own appreciation for you, Prabhu, is in your children. I have the privilege of knowing all of them to some degree or another, and as many parents in Krishna consciousness know, it's difficult to have even one kind of stick and follow through with the practice, and you're 3 for 3. All of your children are serious devotees in their own right, and so that's a great accomplishment in and of itself. So thank you so much for being here today to discuss with us Krishna consciousness as the greatest welfare work, and it's something that you've really dedicated yourself to, is the sharing of Krishna consciousness with others. But as I mentioned, first I'd just kind of like to get into how you met the devotees, how you yourself became attracted to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Prabhuji. I'm delighted to be here. My beginnings of Krishna consciousness were the single-handed efforts of one man who was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. His name was Tribhuvannath Das. Didn't know his name until the 3rd meeting. And with each of these 3 meetings, I got a little bit closer until I actually talked to him. But they all involved pop festivals, and they all involved crowds of people and the rain. And on the last occasion I met him, it was raining, and I was 17. And what hippies we had in England had overtaken the Queen's back garden, which was Windsor Castle. So we could see Windsor Castle in the back, and there was tension growing between the local authorities and the hippies. I just happened to be sort of a passenger with this cultural tension. And Tribhuvannath said, "Why don't you come out of the rain? We've got a place for you to stay." And they fed me, invited me to join their kirtan, and I never looked back. But it was kindness that brought me in, I think, and their determination to be reaching out to people in the rain, which I thought was pretty dedicated.
Yeah. So you saw an exceptional example of determination early on.
I did. I saw people who were, I didn't know whether I believed in anything they told me. I thought they looked pretty cool. I thought they were Buddhists. And I liked the idea of reincarnation and meditation and karma and all those kind of things. I wasn't too sure about Krishna, whether that was some sort of geographical or cultural accretion that was sort of stuck onto Buddhism, because the template of Buddhism was orange robes and shaved heads, and these people were obviously Buddhists despite what they were telling me. And
whether they liked it or not.
Whether they liked it or not, you will be a Buddhist. So I came along with them and gradually came to know what it was all about. I put up a fight, but the fight wasn't good enough, unfortunately.
Thankfully, Tribhuvannath was a qualified warrior. That's a nice segue, Prabhu, because you kind of met the devotees in the classical circumstance that we think of.
Yeah.
When we think of preaching and outreach, especially in the mood of Mahaprabhu, and as Srila Prabhupada gave it to us, those simple, sweet ways of book distribution, street sankirtan, festivals. Is there any difference between today and then in terms of how to connect people to Krishna consciousness? Those methods, should there be other methods? Is there a separation? What's your thoughts on how to connect people today to Krishna consciousness?
Yeah, my thoughts as a missionary movement, a religious movement, spiritual movement, preaching movement, we are permanently in a state of tension between two very important things. One is preserving the legacy of thousands of years of tradition given to us by the most recent representative, A.C.Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Yeah.
And at the same time, making sure that we're relevant and accessible to the people of 2021, 22, 23, etc. So the core values, the core teachings, and the core expressions, namely the Hare Krishna mantra, must stay the same. But the packaging in which that's delivered will be completely relevant and accessible to the people of the day. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did it, Bhaktivinoda Thakur did it, Srila Prabhupada definitely did it, and we're also called upon to do it. But certain things stay the same and certain things will be changed. Otherwise, we will be irrelevant. But because we're focusing on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, let's begin with a verse. He was explaining the famous verse that all devotees chant before they go on Harinam, Harinam Eva Kevalam. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Anyata imane taranahika nistar nahi 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 etina evakar. He was explaining that verse and said, this states that anyone who accepts any other path cannot be delivered. That's the first point. This is the reason for the triple repetition, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else, which emphasizes the real process of self-realization. So that's hardcore Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, non-negotiable. This is what we do. This is what the movement's all about. And in that same section, which is the 13th chapter of Adi Leela, Prabhupada says, on these principles only does the Krishna consciousness movement go on. We have no other business than to talk of Krishna, worship Krishna, and chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So that's the non-negotiable. That's the legacy that we're charged to preserve. But let's be clear that our family business can come in a multitude of colorful packaging to attract the minds and sensibilities of the people of the day. So the things that Prabhupada emphasized, kirtan, prasadam, books, deity worship, festivals based on deity worship, these things are the sort of things that we do. They're the ingredients of the Hare Krishna movement that are non-negotiable. How you present that to people, and more importantly, when you present it to people on their journey, that's the most important thing. When you hold back and when you offer something that will change according to the sensibility of the person and the confidence and ability of the particular preacher.
That there's two directions I want to take this. Questions coming up in my own mind. I loved how you narrowed down what it is, the essence of what was given, and then the packaging, say, is something that's a little more negotiable. There seems to be a kind of, I'll use a word that might be touchy, but it's almost a nostalgia around the traditional packaging, let's say, the packaging that was there in the early days of the movement. And of course, that's the packaging that was created by Prabhupada and his followers directly when he was present. And there's an apprehension almost to give up that packaging in certain circumstances, even though it might make more sense from the side of a material perspective, what's going to be more effective and attractive for people today. So how can we navigate that, especially in this awkward period after Prabhupada has recently departed, his disciples are still present? How do we navigate what packaging to use and what's not kind of being disrespectful to the tradition?
I think certain elements have to be there before we start thinking of changing packaging, and these are some non-negotiables that go along with the basic messages. And one is that firstly, in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, everybody is a preacher. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Kala Malakara Ami Kahan Kahan Yaba Ekalava Katapala Padiya Vilava. I am the only gardener. How many places can I go? How many fruits can I pick and distribute? So a crucial element is that perhaps now that the movement has been successful, there is a tendency to regard preachers as a select species of life. It's something that other people do. There's book distributors and there's managers, and book distributors preach and managers manage. I think that's a dangerous dichotomy to raise, because in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, everybody is picking the fruit. Everybody is, everybody becomes a gardener. Secondly, everybody has to be following the process. Prabhupada says that to be a preacher means to be humble, to be happy, to be pure, things like this. And I really think that if we hold on to those two things, then we're doing very well. And from that position of strength, then we can begin to negotiate what is the packaging that I would like to deliver. Otherwise, certain things can be lost in the desire to be relevant and accessible. Relevant and accessible doesn't mean making yourself fashionable and losing what it is you came to give the person in the first place. But I do think that being a conscious preacher, and we'll go a little later on into whether that word preaching has been abused and misused.
Yeah.
The first thing is to become, as Prabhupada was, sensitive to people's interests. In other words, people already have two things going on for them. They have their spiritual journey that's going on, whether we recognize it or not. Everybody that comes to us is on a spiritual journey. At Bhaktivedanta Manor, the temple I'm associated with, in 1973, Prabhupada says, anyone who comes to the temple, he said, Mahavishnu has sent him there personally, so please take care of him. He's been sent by the Lord. So that's one thing. So they're on a spiritual journey. That journey involves Krishna, whether they recognize that fact or not. Second thing is that they've already got their packaging by the level of interest that they have in different aspects. And there are various projects in ISKCON that are successfully addressing themselves to the prevailing interest that a person has. So a person comes to us from the green movement, and we have something to say about that. They come from the yoga community, or the kirtan element of the yoga community. We have something to say about that. They're interested in Vedanta philosophy, Upanishads. We can help with that. They just want to belong to a community, and they feel, because they're coming from a nuclear family or a very isolated space in their life, they need to belong, have a sense of a tribe to belong to. We can help with that. They're vegan, we can definitely help with that. Or none of those things. They just want to know, a lot of people these days want to tick Hare Krishna off their list. They think, well, I should know something about these guys. I've seen them often enough. Let me check them off the list to see why I don't like them. And they check us out, and they're more involved. So what we need to do is to acknowledge that they have a level of spiritual interest, and then we need to be intuitive, and we need to ask them questions. And sometimes people say that we don't ask questions and we don't listen, because we're so keen on telling people what we believe and how they should behave that we don't ask questions. So we have two examples in Prabhupada's life. One is the Bhagavatam speaker, in which Prabhupada did all the talking and we did all the listening. And there was a couple of questions at the end. That's one format. The other format, the other Prabhupada, you could say, is the person who gave himself in conversations. And in those conversations, if you study conversation books or tapes, what happened? Streaming Prabhupada's recordings, you will discover that Prabhupada spent a lot of his time listening. And that's the art of a preacher, is knowing not what to say at first, but how to listen. and from the listening will come the speaking. So I think the best type of preacher, teacher, missionary worker, guru addresses himself or herself to, I use Prabhupada's words, nice. Nice for me means NICE, the needs of a person, the interests of a person, the concerns of a person. What are they a little slightly apprehensive about? What have they heard about Hare Krishna that might not directly connect with their values?
Yeah.
And what are their expectations? What do they expect from us? So nice. So we address our messages to these four things. And I think that's a good guide for preachers in general.
Clever.
Nice. Be nice.
Be a nice devotee. We hear that often.
It's an English word. I know that the word nice has fallen out of fashion in America and some other places, but we still use it in British English.
Well, I would say it would be nice if more devotees conceived of this as the way to approach their outreach. And I like that point about listening. It's Shravanam Kirtanam. This is how we preach to ourselves, so to speak, hearing and chanting.
Yeah.
And it's an effective way to actually connect with others also. Hear first, and then do a little chanting based on what you've heard from them. Makes a lot of sense, actually. So a question I have then, because you mentioned these different interest groups, and our movement has something for everyone practically. Everyone is searching for Krishna in different aspects of his manifestation, as Prabhupada says. So we may be able to draw in somebody from the yoga crowd or the environmental crowd, vegan, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see that switch happening for people in your experience from somebody who's just kind of favorable and friendly to really following the mission and feeling themselves a member of Prabhupada's community?
Well, let me address myself to a slight problem. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. The slight problem is that not everybody considers themselves to be a guru in the sense that Lord Chaitanya spoke the word, used the word. And what I mean by that is that in ISKCON 2021, we all use the word guru to mean a specific individual who initiates. But the Sanskrit of I don't want to get into any controversial areas, but the point that
please do.
The thing is that in a preaching movement like ours, everybody is a guru. You have to, and although we may encourage devotees to get in touch with their inner disciple, I think it's just as important to get devotees to get in touch with their inner guru. Guru simply means someone who's heavy with knowledge, someone who knows something, and hopefully someone who wants to share. So I take it, my take on this verse, Kipa Vipra, Kipa Nyasi Shudra Kenenai, Ye Krishna Tatvaveta, say Guru Hoy. In the purport, Prabhupada says this, the word guru equally applies to Vartma Pradarshaka Guru, Shiksha Guru, Diksha Guru, etc. So anyone who knows anything about Krishna and who's a follower of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is sort of duty bound by his order to share that with others. And if you're not sharing, then that's a shame, because you have so much within yourself. And I find these days that I have to speak to devotees quite often about their qualifications for sharing what has convinced them themselves. Because many devotees don't take the opportunity to connect with others because of what they perceive as their own lack of qualification. And if only they would do that, they would become very regular messages, because in the world today, there are many people talking about bhakti who have no connection with real bhakti.
Authorized.
There are many spiritual teachers, gurus, shamans, mystics who are going online with their podcasts and their YouTubes and their internet communities. And really what they're giving is very small in comparison to what any of our young devotees can give. So I would say, before we talk about having attracted people from these different communities, that every single devotee must really understand that you are empowered as soon as you step up to the plate to share something that you know. One time they came to Prabhupada and they said, Prabhupada, should we wait until we're pure before we preach? And Prabhupada laughed. He said, if you He said, if you wait until that day comes, he said, you will wait forever.
Nothing will ever happen.
But better to preach and become pure while you're preaching. I just said I would make that point because it's a point that's often overlooked.
I appreciate that you did.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sense of responsibility being there in everyone's, in the forefront of our Krishna conscious experience. And we could get into a different direction altogether in the conversation, which is tempting.
We could indeed. Yeah.
But I'll bring it back to that idea. So I have that invigorated sense, but now what does it take to bring somebody from that place of familiarity, friendly with the devotees, to really becoming serious themselves? Somebody who I'm preaching to, or I'm connected with in some way. How to bring them over the hump into really becoming serious about their own practice?
Yeah, in 1985, when I'd been a devotee for 11 years, and I thought I knew the answer to this question. And if life teaches you anything, it's that you know nothing. I went to India to be part of a padayatra, a walking festival through the south of India that was heralding the 500th anniversary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's birth in 1986, the following year. And we were just south of the place known as Kurmakshetra, where a famous conversation took place between Lord Chaitanya and a Brahmin who wanted to join him, but the Lord said, no, you stay at home and you get other people involved in your locality. And so we were coming up the road one day and we saw a kirtan in front of us. And you may think that's not unusual, but in that part of India,
South India,
to have a Hare Krishna Maha Mantra kirtan with drums and cymbals. So I thought immediately, well, it must be a branch of the Gaudiya Math coming to see us. They said, no. Must be another group. They said, no. So when we got to the village, we found that these people had been, every morning before breakfast, they'd been the men of the village with the ladies on the doorstep, but the men of the village were joined together by the village well, and they would do kirtan. And they'd walk from the village well to the outskirts and back up to the road and then back to the well, just half an hour. And we asked them, where does this all come from? And they said, 500 years ago, someone was walking this path on his way south, and he told us to do this. And I said, what was the name of this person? Of course, they were enthralled to see me because they'd never seen a white man before. This is Andhra Pradesh. And we suggested to them, and we met the village elder who was 91, and he said, oh yes, Chaitanya Gauranga. And they had done this every day for the past, whatever it was, 450 years, 460 years. And I wondered, what was the secret that Lord Chaitanya had? And as part of my preparing for this class, I did a lot of reading. And I kept seeing this word, alingana, alingana, alingana. And it means that wherever Lord Chaitanya went, he embraced. Alingana means embraced. So it wasn't just the chanting of Hare Krishna. It wasn't just a high philosophy, but he made friends with people. And when you ask me the question, how do we keep people in Krishna consciousness for a lifetime? I must say, alingana, embrace them, make friends. And as kids in school, we used to have this thing. We said, make friends, never, never break friends. But in a recent survey, recent for my lifetime, about 20 years ago in America, they asked a lot of New Age people who knows the most in the new spiritual community and who's the most friendly. And strangely enough, the devotees of Krishna, we came out as the most rooted in knowledge, but least friendly, which was a great surprise to us because we thought, come on, we're friendly people. We sing, dance, we're happy people. But they had judged ISKCON on the basis of the communication they had received, which was often a very discursive exchange with a book distributor, which lasted for the average of 3 minutes, because of course you can't speak to anyone for more than that time. Or the Harinam party which walked past them but didn't talk to them.
Hmm.
And on this basis, they have judged that we weren't very friendly. So 85% of people who join a new religious organization do so because of a friend who was already involved. So it means that the membership of an organization is swollen by friendship, and it's decreased through lack of friendship.
Hmm.
So we are friendly people. It's just how to get people to feel that we are friendly. And I think there is, we must want people's company, stay in touch with them, don't forget them. We need to make friends with the people that are important for them, at least be civil. But it means different things to different people, and I think our approach has to be according to the people, the person that we find in front of us. So maybe we can have that picture now, because the picture with the big triangle.
Yes, maybe is a good way of putting it. While I'm pulling it up, I just want to ask, a kind of apprehension comes up I often find for devotees, the asat sanga tyaga, right? To give up the association of worldly people. So there's this apprehension that until the guys like got their kunti mala on, the tilak is there, then I really can't get so friendly, so close, especially with their extended connections, what to speak of even themselves.
Yeah. Here is where a little Sanskrit comes in order. Because in the Sanskrit language, which is our mother tongue, there are 7 words for friendship. And that's a hierarchy of friendship, all the way from nodding acquaintance and staying in touch and sending a Christmas card to someone, all the way up to a surat, who is a bosom friend, who's like my brother from another mother. But there are different gradations of friendship. And I would suggest that the asat sangha that we are warned to avoid is the 7th level of friendship, which is eating together, joking together, sharing ideas, listening, like that. And the 1st and 2nd level of friendship is something more on the order of a polite affiliation with a person. What did Prabhupada say one time? He said you should send them a newsletter or send them a magazine. He said, just to know that you are still alive, just to know that you care. And I think that there's different levels. And of course, it takes experience and it takes, caution. But sometimes I think we may worry more than is necessary. So don't be too worried. Unless, of course, you really feel tempted to share in their lifestyle and then back away. But a certain healthy caution is good, but too much fear will paralyze the preaching movement.
Love that answer.
Or constipate it.
Which is in some ways more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share my screen. What was did you want to give us the 7 step there, or the?
Well, no, what it is that this is something that's been prepared by the GBC SPT. It is a diagram. Maybe the picture is big enough for everybody to see, but it's just a sort of a flow chart of different stages in a person's journey towards a vigorous participation in Krishna consciousness. At the top, you have the 2 levels, seeds and contact. The seeds is indirect exposure, where a person hears about us but hasn't met us. The next stage is to contact us. That they may do through book distribution, festivals, interaction with devotees that they know in the locality. And the next sort of 4 sections are when a person begins considering they've heard something and they want to explore that. But they often come to us and they go to another yoga group. And when they come to us, they say, what do you think about the Satchidananda people? And when they go to the Satchidananda people, they think, what do you think of the Hare Krishna people? And they're comparing and contrasting. Because gone are the days in the 1970s when we were the only show in town. Now we're just part of this a multiverse of spirituality. They can contact anybody anywhere, and sometimes they find they like the Swami such and such people, and they like the Hare Krishna people for the food and the kirtan, but they like the philosophy of Swami such and such. So they're comparing and contrasting. And then if they take up the practices, then gradually that transformation becomes rapid until a point of commitment where they actually commit themselves in some way. The next stage after commitment is sort of advocacy, where they take it upon themselves, having bought into Hare Krishna lifestyle, to share it with someone else. Now, if you show the other picture, you'll see that a lot of people don't quite make it all the way to advocacy. That's the one, yeah. So that one shows, on the right-hand side, you've got the flow chart showing the gradual transformation, but the big picture is of a funnel-shaped or inverted triangle-shaped sort of a population diagram. It's like a marketing funnel, they call it, a sales funnel. Out of all the people that you advertise to, out of all the people that you contact, only a few people take up the product, and of the people that take up the product, a lesser number of people become regular users of the product, and gradually till you get the real hardcore salespeople at the bottom. So I'd like to suggest that at any one time, 10 to 15% of people involved in Krishna consciousness may become the responsible caretakers of the legacy and share it with the next generation. And I like to describe that as, sort of the sort of averages that we get. I did a festival program eventually with Tribhuvanath, who cajoled me into joining. And it's interesting, actually. I was like a fish on the end of a line, because I was giving many different reasons as to why I couldn't join. In those days, join meant to come and live with the Hare Krishna devotees in their house, in their community. I was giving many different reasons, and he gently persuaded me that these reasons were not good enough, and I should try harder. And eventually I ran out of reasons, and I remained. But he took me with him on a festival program. The average night, we would get 300 to 400 people coming to a Hare Krishna festival, without any exaggeration. 10% of those people would come to a follow-up meeting, and 50% of those who came to a follow-up meeting would become regular practitioners. So we'd go from 400 to 40, and from 40 we'd go to sort of what figure did I mention? About 20. So in any town, in any city, we knew that from 400 coming to a festival, we'd get 20. And of the 20, 3 or 4 would become initiated.
Wow.
The big mistake we made, the big classical mistake we made in days gone by, boys and girls, please don't mistake this, is that we said, well, you're now an initiated devotee, you should live in the temple. We took the initiated people away from that town. The group collapsed, and ISKCON no longer had any presence in that town. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to spread it to every town and village. But we thought we had to save them from
the town and village.
Save them from every town and village and bring them to the temple where they would be safe. Where on average they lived for 3 years before they left us to go back to every town and village. It wasn't such a practical growth. Prabhupada at one time in 1970, he said in 18 days, he said, you could conquer Britain, because the George Harrison record had just been released. He said, with this level of popularity, he said, you could conquer Britain in 18 days. He said, but I will teach you how. But so we have to have a little systematizing of our outreach and preaching and mission. It's as scientific as you like it to be, but it's with the heart, but with scientific analysis of figures and being very careful to see where you place your efforts, because our time is very precious for us. Our resources, our financial resources, are very precious to us. So how you preach, what you preach, who you preach to is a subject of vigorous review and constant analysis.
Yeah, and maybe that brings us, I love the synthesis there, and especially the point about taking people out of their natural environment. You brought up the Kurma Brahmana example and how Mahaprabhu himself was advocating for people to stay put and simply apply the teachings. And we made that mistake of not really following that for a period of time.
Yeah.
So there's wonderful points you're bringing, and you keep using this word preaching. So maybe it is time to bring up that idea that this is a kind of like dirty word now. It's a pejorative. People don't want to be involved with preaching. How is that healthy? How do we change that? Is there another word? Should we rebrand it? How do we get around this awkwardness?
Well, preach is. I mean, I grew up in a Methodist family, and my grandfather was a Methodist preacher. So whenever I think of the term preach, I think of my grandfather. So it has a warm and fuzzy feeling for me. But I understand it may not be that for everybody else. I think the English language changes like any language. Preach is an English word. It can be good or bad depending on how you use it. Preach actually means to exhort a person, to try to persuade them, to lift them up to a higher level of spirituality or religious practice or belief. And it actually means to preach to someone, means to preach to people who have chosen to come to that church to listen to you speak. So when you preach, you are preaching to the converted. So in that sense, preaching, they feel good about it, otherwise they wouldn't be there. However, you go into a church and you know what the guy's going to say because it's a Christian church. So don't be upset if they tell you to be a better Christian. But that's what you paid for. You paid to go there. You go to see a movie. It's a crime thriller movie. Don't protest that it was the wrong movie. You made the choice and you paid it. Yeah. So, but preaching is also used to indicate teachings given as part of missionary work for people who don't believe. So when it's used in that context, it's persuasion. We're exhorting a person to join something, believe in something that they don't already. So there's resistance. So when people haven't asked you to speak to them, haven't asked you to persuade them or convince them or tell them about a wonderful future that can be theirs if they only join you, don't expect that there's resistance, and the word preach has a negative connotation. The word preach is actually a Christian word, and it's one of many Christian words that we use in ISKCON today because of Prabhupada's former connection with a Christian-dominated Christian culture in British India. Just like we use the word incarnation or reincarnation. Incarnation is a Christian word. It's not good for us to use the word incarnation rather than the word avatar, because it means something different. Or we say back to home, back to Godhead. That came originally from a Christian preacher. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati decided to use it. Even the word GBC, Governing Body Commission, is a British invention to describe the governing body of the Indian railways. So it's a we have a lot of baggage with preaching and a lot of English words that we use. But now Christian preachers have gone to the south of India and they've set up churches. There's a lot of Christians there, and the preachers preach, but of course people don't speak English, so the word they use for preach in India right now in a Christian church is the minister is giving the Upadesha. So you've got Christians in India using a Sanskrit word, and you've got Sanskrit faith communities in the West using a Christian word. So the jury's out on whether we should change the word to make it something that we feel more friendly with. And I'm okay with using the word. The fact that Prabhupada used the word means that you won't feel comfortable in changing it anytime soon. But interesting that the English word preaching may come from the Sanskrit word prachara. Prachar which means the same thing. Yeah, I think we have a duty to, as we said at the beginning, to modulate the way we present ourselves to others. And if that means not using certain trigger words, and there's a lot of trigger words because it's 2021 and people are very, very, very easily triggered by ISKCON philosophy, teaching, Prabhupadisms, our culture. I mean, everything is a potential trigger. So maybe the new rule coming from the GBC was don't trigger people in your presentation of Krishna consciousness. But, we can't change everything because that means changing something which is eternal. But, if you come up with another word like outreach or transmission or communications or teachings, then I'm fine with that. I know my daughter Janavi, she there's certain trigger words that she just doesn't use anymore, like chant. Chant, she says, is a trigger word. I said, why is chant a trigger word? She says because it invokes a sort of cult-like adherence to a belief system. So when you chant, you're automatically telling people to become part of a religious system. But if you use the word recite, it doesn't have the same connotation. And of course, if you say the word sing, that's a much friendlier way to say sing Hare Krishna. Chant. This is So I'm old. I'm over 60. So if you tell me that there's a better English word to use for preach, I will say, my dear Prabhu, please go with that. Do the same thing, but use a different word. I don't mind. I really don't.
Thank you. That's a wonderful kind of laying out of the minefield there. I wanted to go back to this discussion about the temples, and as you mentioned, there was a kind of misunderstanding that was there for a long time that everyone who's serious comes to live in the temple. And I think we've kind of gotten out of that as a society. We've been forced out of that as a society.
Yeah.
There is another challenge, though, in this idea that going to the temple is the goal of reaching out to someone, outreach, preaching, etc., getting them into the temple, and to provide a kind of support for my counter argument here. And I'd like to hear your thoughts. One Christian organization here in America that I've studied, they have a congregation of 40,000, and their church building holds like 15,000 maximum. And they have a whole, as you said, systematic way of reaching out to people. And again, this is America, this is Christian philosophy, so nobody's surprised by anything they're saying to them. But in their stepwise progression of bringing someone in, they don't ask them to come to the church for 2 years. It's a kind of initiation once they enter the church building that has happened after they've gone to countless dinners at people's homes personally, gone into little study groups for the Bible, and kind of been developed to the place where once you're walking through those church doors, you know that you're part of the club now, and you accept that, you appreciate that. What's the role of the temples today in a healthy preaching mission for ISKCON?
Oh, how long have you got?
Well, since you're speaking, we've got a while.
Okay. Well, I think our understanding of what the ISKCON institution is very outdated, because the plan should have changed a long time ago, because the battle changed. They say as soon as the battle begins, your plans should change. I think that if there's one difficulty that ISKCON has, is coping with its success. We tend to look at ISKCON's failures, that there's with difficulty in leadership and financial problems over here, and a few things that we don't tell anybody about over there. But really, it's been a success if you analyze the progress. But we still, as part of our preservation of the legacy, we're still sort of thinking of ourselves as a network of matchless gifts, stores, with shaven-headed people, etc., like that. I mean, that changed maybe a quarter of a century ago.
Yes.
But we don't recognize that. I mean, I think that's part of the legacy of the past, where, I mean, I know when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, when you said Hare Krishna temple, you meant a community, and that was anywhere between 8 to 20 people on average. There were some big places like Chicago, New York, LA, London, and some other places. But on average, between 8 and 20 people at the height of our development when Prabhupada was with us. We've sort of kept on that vision to the point where if you look at any BBT book, you will see a definition of ISKCON as a network of temples, farms, restaurants, and schools around the world. It's not. That's not what we are. It hasn't been that way for many, many years. We are much bigger than that. So failure to understand when you've been successful means that you won't be able to cope with your success. So the fact that we went from 100 temples to 600 or something, that's wonderful. And temples will always be a place for, as Prabhupada said, people to come and learn. They learn how to purify their lives. Let me count on the fingers. They learn how to purify their lives. They learn the philosophy. They learn, but they don't sit there until they've got back to Shastri. They learn, Dashamula Shiksha, the essential philosophy, or Bhagavad Gita, the essence of Bhagavad Gita. And then Prabhupada said, when they've taken Devotees Association, they go home and they do the same thing in their home. This was always the plan, but we sort of didn't maybe identify so much with that plan, because success is obviously when you make a person become a brahmachari. But I would say success is also when you know the right time to send the brahmachari home. Because we have some 40-year-old, 45-year-old brahmacharis who really should have been sent home a long time ago, because it's the right. And so the movement has, the temples seem to be not, in many cases, and excuse me if I'm saying the wrong thing here, but there seems to be many temples that are not as dynamic as they could be. And we have to keep things flowing in order to keep that dynamism, that sense of movement. Otherwise it becomes very stale. So the real role of the temples are training centers. They're places, they're ashrams for spiritual depth. They are places where people can learn the techniques and teachings for becoming missionaries themselves. But I would like to suggest they are places where people prepare to be married. And that is a revolutionary concept, that brahmachari life is a preparation for marriage. But hey, look in the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vedic Shastras, and to test my theory while I was in India, in South India, where I go quite a few times, I visited 2 traditional gurukulas where they were learning the Upanishads by rote, rising at 3 in the morning, doing fire yagyas every morning, and doing deity worship, etc. But in the afternoon, he said, I'm learning architecture, and my friend is learning computer science. I said, but this is a traditional gurukula. And he looked at me as if I was foolish. He said, yes, but I won't be here all the time. He was struggling to get the concept over to the ISKCON man that people don't stay in a gurukula. So when we say ashram, without mentioning any names of any Christian organizations, I see one very successful Christian organization is to keep people for 2 or 3 years on an intense, focused spiritual development course that sets them up for life and sends them home to where their uncles and aunties can see to the rest of their life in a supportive environment.
Yeah.
I can't, otherwise I see that we keep people for too long. They become bitter because their life isn't quite working out for some reason. They go home, and if they have a home, and they talk about their life when I was a devotee. And living at the temple and being a devotee, they see as the same thing. When actually speaking, if this Krishna consciousness does not work for a person who does not live in a temple, then it's not working. If it's something that only works when you live in a temple, then it's useless. And I know it's not useless. I know it's a great gift to humanity, but it has to become successful where the person lives.
Horrible.
If every town and village is to mean anything at all, if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission is to mean anything at all, then we should see people living their lives in every town and village taking up Krishna consciousness. But a failure is when we haven't coped with the fact that people don't neatly live 2 miles from a temple. And that's the problem. We set up a temple and we expect that people, am I getting too irate? We set up a temple and we expect that our new members will come from that particular city. Well, they may do, but perhaps they'll come from 20 miles away or 40 miles away or 50 miles away. And can you support them? So what does an organization look like that supports people where they live? It certainly means that we become more regional than metropolitan. So often ISKCON is a metropolitan phenomenon where we are in the major cities and the suburbs, but beyond that, we have no plan. But we distribute books everywhere. So if a person reads a book and they become interested, but they live in, 50, 60, 70, 100 miles from a temple, what is it that you can do as a temple to reach out to that person? If you find what it is, then you'll be successful. And it's not, it's not that people aren't doing that. I know there's very good, very, very good programs in ISKCON at the moment that put all the purity of the teachings with a relevant and accessible packaging. They have a geographical plan. They have a systematic plan for transformation of a person's commitment over years. There are such places, but I think they're few and far between. And I just think that, we need to take advantage of the pioneering work that's being done by these very, I'd say, gold standard preaching centers, and to use those and to copy ideas. Ideas sharing is a very good system. Is that okay? There's just a few thoughts.
Thank you, Prabhu. That's such a wonderful exposition of that question. I'm going to remove myself from the stream after asking this question just to try to get closer to a better Wi-Fi connection.
Okay.
I think I was coming in and out a little bit, but you've made, I'm tempted to keep going down that direction that you were with cultivating people where they are and the centers as training. But there's actually another natural segue there to something that we wanted to bring in, which was Mahaprabhu opening up. He's egalitarian in the best way. Everybody can come and be involved. And yet we also saw through Mahaprabhu's example that if somebody made a mistake, they were removed from the Sangha to some degree. And he curated certain environments where certain people weren't allowed to be for various reasons. And in the mood of spreading Mahaprabhu's mission far and wide, there is this egalitarian ethic. But is there room or is there a need for in our ISKCON community to be a little exclusive in certain environments, either by removing people who've done some transgression or just in recognizing keeping Sajjatiya Sangha, keeping the like-minded association alive. How does one navigate that dynamic next to this egalitarian idea?
Yeah. One phenomenon that I've seen over the years is that because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission was for everyone without discrimination, then some phenomenon has developed whereby we preach to the poor, or the low-spirited, or the disenfranchised, and we try to justify only preaching to that section of society, with the idea that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement is for everyone. And I've seen this with on some occasions. We try to artificially let me be careful how I speak here. Let me give you an example. Prabhupada came to Bhaktivedanta Manor in 1972, I believe it was. Mukunda Maharaj was the temple president, the golden years. The temple was filled with people. We were, it was George Harrison, it was celebrity endorsement par excellence, it was the Beatles, it was, Prabhupada was in the country, the temple was packed with people jumping, Haribol, 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 Haribol. And everybody thought, well, this is a great success because we're bringing people. But Prabhupada wrote to Mukunda, he said, you have to go to the universities and find leaders, find intelligent men who can become leaders of the future in our movement. He said, how much longer will they go on jumping? And this is Prabhupada's words, jumping, Haribol, Haribol, Haribol. And this is, for me, this was a sort of a very interesting contrast to the idea of egalitarian reaching out to everyone. But in 1972, Prabhupada was still building a movement, and he really needed, what does he say, thoughtful, intelligent, first-class men and women. And, so he said Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement must be preached without discrimination. And there is actually an interesting episode where Lord Chaitanya sends Nityananda back to Bengal, as we know. Don't come to Rath Yatra every year. Get married. And preach. And he said, make sure you preach to the poorest class of people. And then at the same time, we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, can we say, deliberately preaching to Sarvabhauma, who was the best philosopher, Ramananda Roy, who was closely associated with the royal family, to Rupa and Sanatan, who were the ministers of the Nawab of Bengal. So we see that Prakashananda Saraswati, who was the chief Vedantist. So we see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did both things. One of my observations is that devotees find it more comfortable to preach down than they do to preach up. And this has a disconcerting effect in that if I'm from, should we say, a certain social rung of society, I won't feel comfortable in speaking Krishna consciousness and the values of taking up Krishna consciousness to someone who's on a social rung above me. And the spiral effect of that is that when person A speaks down to person B speaks down to person C, then ISKCON's capabilities in the intelligent, thoughtful leadership department sort of spirals downwards, when actually it should be spiraling upwards and outwards at the same time. So it's just an observation. I don't know whether that is a classist thing coming from a British man, but we have to be speaking to leaders of society, influential people and also affluential people as well. Prabhupada said every endeavor needs capital, manpower, needs space, and leadership, management. Now, one of our members here in this country has took it upon themselves to try to create a school for which would have an ethos of sort of a spiritual ethos, a Krishna conscious ethos, a Krishna school. Then the government stepped in and said, well, if you're going to do that, here's 12 million pounds for you to do it with. Good idea. And so now he's done another school, another school, another school, another school. We're up to 200 million government funding, 200 million pounds of government funding for what is ostensibly schools that people will hear the holy name of Krishna. Now, make no mistake, they're not temples. Some of them have got temples in every classroom, little shrines. It's not a place where they will they'll get a good British education, but they will also, you know, when they sit down to take the vegetarian lunch, which is served to them, all the children, black, white, Hindu, and Muslim children, will sit together, sometimes to the consternation of the Muslim parents later on in life, or later on in the day when they go home and say the same prayers. They will say, Sharirara Vijajal. And when they greet the deities with Govindam prayers. So they're getting that as well as a good British education paid for by the government. And I would say that's one of the results of preaching up rather than preaching down. And I hope I'm understood in the way that I'm intended. So your question though was based on who do we accept, and is there possible occasions where we have to remove someone from our company? Well, I would see it as very dynamic. We're constantly jostling for position. I tell people generally that if you're any devotee should be chanting 16 rounds, 4 regulated principles. This is if they're initiated. If they're committed, we have 2 things, initiated and committed. The committed devotee chants 4 rounds, and you know, they do the principles as they can. But you should also be able to say that you're looking after 10 people. That's all. And if each devotee looks after 10 people, and each of them look after 10 people, then we have a dynamic. Now, which 10 do I look after? This one's become a little troublesome. Okay, now you're down to 9. Now you take another one and add that person to the 10, and you're looking after 10. So you keep a balance, always looking after 10 people, and 10 people look after 10 people. This is not a new idea. Prabhupada said how one teacher is looking after thousands in the ancient Gurukula. Now we have a ISKCON BBT painting where Sandipani Muni is looking after Krishna and Balaram, and his wife is standing by a little cottage. Actually, Sandipani Muni was looking after 17,000 students. Prabhupada said how one Gurukula teacher is looking after so many. He said because he looks after 10, and they look after 10, and they look after 10, like that. He says this is how Durvasa Muni looked after 60,000 disciples. He only spoke to 10 disciples. Each of them looked after the others. It's how an army works. And incidentally, it's how Prabhupada's guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, conceived of the Gaudiya Math working, because he initiated 10,000 or more than 10,000 people. Only a very small minority of them lived in the temple in the mud. How did he look after the others? Well, each disciple was looked after by someone called an Upadeshika. And they were the mentor, counselor, shiksha, guru, call them what you like, but they looked after them. And usually he would look after a number of them. And the Upadeshika, who looked after him? Well, he was looked after by someone called a Maha Upadeshika. You get the picture? Yes. So the Maha Upadeshika is looking after the Upadeshikas, and the Upadeshika is looking after the Shishyas. But who looks after the Maha Upadeshikas? Well, it's the sannyasis. 18 sannyasis Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur had. Who looks after the sannyasis? The Acharya. So with this pyramid system, you know, you've got a system whereby everybody means their progress, their spiritual progress means something to somebody else. Nobody gets forgotten. Everybody gets looked after. And they know of a named individual that they can approach with any problem or any doubt or any question that they've got. And I know who my named individual is. You know who your named individual is. And we don't have to get into a whole guru thing with flowers and cushions and bowing down. It's a friend. Just like Prabhupada was talking to one of his secretaries, and Prabhupada was telling him about the school that he used to go to in Calcutta. And then the devotees just sort of said, well, my school teacher was like this. And then he caught himself and said, I'm sorry, Prabhupada. He said, I've just been treating you as if you're a friend, sharing with you my idea of my recollections of history. I should have been. Prabhupada said, no. He said, do not worry. He said, the relationship between the spiritual master and the disciple is one of friendship. He said, but just occasionally, I have to remind you who is the guru and who is the disciple. He said, but the relationship is one of friendship. So no cushions, no flowers, no poetry, no birthday cakes. Unless you really want to, of course, then I'm sure they're grateful. But the point is, it's friendship. And with this system, whether they live in the temple or whether they don't, everybody can be cared for. But the question is, who do you belong to? Who have you put your spiritual life in the hands of? Who cares for you? Who's your friend? These are the questions that need to be answered for everybody. So you're chanting, yes, very nice. You're reading, very nice. Who's looking after you? Oh, nobody's looking after you. That should really jump out at us as a, something that needs to be, taken care of. If no one's looking after you, then Swami Satchidananda will look after you. Or the big church with 40,000 members. And we are very good at making devotees. The Catholic Church, the Vatican in Rome, gave us a compliment. They said, we just don't understand how you're getting so many young men in Italy to take up celibacy. They said, we can't do it anymore. I said, what is your secret? And they said, well, it's Prabhupada's books. So the Vatican set up a department for studying Prabhupada's books. Imagine that.
Wow.
So the point is that, we make people, but the Catholic Church knows about how to hang on to people. We don't hang on to people as much as we should. Even now I will name drop, the Mormon Church, it might even have been you, I don't know, but one devotee, his brother was a Mormon and he became a devotee. And they said, there's one thing about the Hare Krishnas that we really like, is you're really good at preaching. And but there's one question we have that we just can't figure out. They said, why don't you look after your people? If we had young people coming to us in the numbers that you have, we'd really have a program for looking after them. Why don't you look after them? And I just think that we have developed a culture where young people coming to check out Hare Krishna are kind of dispensable. We kind of think there'll be another batch along very soon. And I would suggest, my dear Vaishnavas, you can only do that for so long. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself says, ISKCON may not be the vehicle for spreading to every town and village. And if that day comes, then someone else will do it. And that will be a great shame, I think, because we have Prabhupada's legacy for doing that. We can make it work. But it really, really is the heart connection that is important, and the friendship connection. That does not mean, of course, that we should not have rigorous philosophy and training in purity and humility. All those things have to be there. But really, we have to stop losing people. Otherwise, if you lose a person, they speak about Krishna consciousness. they speak about Krishna consciousness to at least 12 other people. So ISKCON then casts a shadow, a long shadow that goes to every town and village. And it says, Hare Krishnas, yeah, they're nice, but then they stop writing, they stop calling, I had some issues, and they said a few things I didn't, because, you have to, the best preachers in ISKCON have to protect people from speaking to the worst preachers. We have some, isn't it?
You're speaking music to my ears, Prabhu.
Yeah. I don't know how long we have on this call.
Well, I know that you have something else to do, so I don't want to.
Oh, my word. Yeah, it's coming up.
You have something else, but
yeah, I do.
Earnestly, this has been one of my favorite conversations I've had the privilege to take part in. So many of the things that you're sharing are insights I've gotten some clue to in my few years trying to do something, and to hear them in this mature, realized way. I hope so much that everyone sees this discussion. Yourself speaking. This was so wonderful.
Well, can I say, in all humility, that you're hearing from someone who's made an awful lot of mistakes in my spiritual life, personally, and in my preaching and missionary work. So if my mistakes can help you not to repeat the mistakes, then my history will contribute towards the future. And with that, I'll be very, very happy.
Hare Krishna. What a sober and great understanding. Thank you again, Kripamoya Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
I'm going to come up with any excuse to have you back and for me to be the person that gets to interview you.
It's been my pleasure.
A wonderful discussion. Thank you, dear devotees, for joining us today. Please keep an eye out on the SPT page over the next few weeks leading up to Gaur Purnim. We have many more wonderful devotees like His Grace Kripamoya Prabhu to join us and bring us deep into the pages of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Glory to the devotees. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.